you doing, guys? Today we are going to start working on the B1290 for the 1956 RJ35. Before I go and dig into the motor itself, one of the things we need right off the bat if we're going to run the Shinaki recoil on it, and by the way, this is a pretty rare bird, not the Shinaki recoil itself, but the screen that it's bolted to. The screens between a Kohler and a Clinton are different, and I will show you the difference in just 1 second. But the Clinton ones tend to be a little bit harder to find than the Kohler ones. But with that being said, in order to get a Shinaki recoil on any of the motors, a Kohler or a Clinton, one of the things you have to have is you have to have the correct sized bored and threaded for the crank, as well as the length. Typically, these smaller style Shinaki nuts I find on the Kohlers. Now, go easy. I'm sure you found a longer one on a Kohler at some time, but I'm just saying, all right? The other thing is, because this came off of the 1200 motor that lost its crankshaft, we already know that this isn't going to work. And this isn't going to work because the diameter of the B1290 crank is larger. So we need to find one of these. And in order to find one of these, we got to get the correct length. In other words, this one, I'm pretty sure, has to be the longer style nut in order for it to work on this motor. In order to do that, we're going to loosely affix the flywheel. We're going to get the blower cover that we're going to use. We're going to kind of put that in. And then we got to somehow, some way measure from the face of the flywheel to about where this nut will engage depth-wise. So in other words, this, because that's threaded, this actually sits kind of right here. We don't want it to bottom out on the recoil, but we just want it to hover a little bit, okay? Because we have to engage this little triangle thing that's sticking out. That is the paw. When we pull the recoil, the paws kind of close in, and they close in on the nut. And you can see where they have kind of bit the nut over and over and over again in the same spot. So let me get this thing somewhat set up. We'll take a peek at what that length is supposed to be, so that way we can reach out to a few individuals and see if they got the right nut for this motor. All right, with the professional lighting in place, let me show you how I'm usually kind of measure these things. Flywheel's in place, it's pushed up or it's seated all the way back on the taper of the crankshaft. There's no need to torque it, as well as there's no need to even put the crank key in place. It's irrelevant. Put the blower cover on, make sure it lines up, fairly close. It's not out of whack like this. It could probably go like that. There you go. So it's fairly close. Everything is, about where it needs to be. This isn't an exact science, but it's close enough. Essentially, what we're going to measure here is we're going to measure from the face of the flywheel to the end of the crank. And then we're also going to need to measure from the face of the recoil to the base of the recoil, or the deepest point. And the reason for that is this: if we grab the recoil, right, and we put that in place roughly, all right, like that, and we look down inside, you can see right there, right in the middle of the screen, there is a little bit of an air gap between the right-hand side, which is the crankshaft, and the left-hand side is the recoil. And it's about 1/8 of an inch visually. It might be a little bit more, it might be a little bit less, but that's close enough. And that's pretty much the amount of space or clearance we're going to want from the base of the recoil to the the front edge of the nut, where the nut kind of sits. All right, we want like a little bit, like 1/8 of an inch clearance. As you can tell right there, that little triangle again is the paw. It doesn't matter really how, if I get a nut that's too long, I can always face it off and make it fit. The thing of it is, I can't have a nut that's too short, because then it won't engage the paws. So I'm going to go ahead, get that rough measurement, and start calling around to a couple of my sources to get the nut, and then we'll be able to put the recoil on. Okay, real quick. So here's the difference between a Shinaki recoil setup for a Kohler versus a Clinton. Right out of the gate, these cooling slots, these openings, that's not a deciding factor, okay, number one. Because Kohlers, the bulk of Kohlers that I've ever seen came with this kind of screen that's on this Clinton Shinaki setup, which is the punched perforated holes here, I guess you would call them. The big difference is the distance of or the size of this fascia, basically the edge of the recoil to this curved edge. If you look on the Clinton, it's much bigger. Same exact center section, same recoil activation right here, but the screen is what makes it a Clinton or a Kohler. The opening of the Kohler motor, this is this just happens to be the grab bag Kohler. The opening is smaller on a Kohler motor versus a Clinton. Thus, this fascia is bigger on the Clinton. And that's how you can tell the difference between, or I should say, tell the difference whether or not this recoil is on a Clinton, like this one, or a Kohler, like that one. All right, let's tear into the ignition system. This is a Type 2, as I've said 100,000 times probably. Showed up with the B1290 motor, and then ran to the 498 nomenclature. And then when the Newton company took over Clinton and was still building these cast iron 498 motors, they also used the Type 2 ignition. The point set cross references to a Tecumseh H60 motor. So the points, you can still get points for this motor super easy. Just look up, I'll get the part number, or I'll show the part number here for the Tecumseh point set. That crosses right into this. The condenser is specific to a Clinton as well as the coil. Even though this coil may look like a Kohler coil to you, the armature block is thinner or smaller on a Clinton compared to a Kohler. So if you order one of these, like Primeline makes the coil for the Kohler, it's going to flop around, and you're going to have to build some sort of spacer in order to get that coil on. So coil's pretty specific to the Clinton. Condenser is pretty specific to the Clinton. Next up, they have a points cover. It's held in by this spring. It's actually spring loaded on this side, okay, and it's hooked on the other side. So just take a screwdriver and just kind of give it a little pop. This little thing will swing down, let that go. Grab this little tang, which is actually kind of a cool thing that Clinton did, if you didn't know. This is 20 thousandths thick. So you can actually use this little tool to take off the gasket, to gap your points. It's actually pretty cool. It even says it right on it. It says set points to 20 thousandths, gauge, and it has a little arrow. You probably can't see it in the video, but yeah, kind of a neat little thing that Clinton did. So you got to take that off. And if you're familiar with Tecumseh's, this should look very similar to you. One other thing about a Clinton Type 2 ignition, or a Clinton ignition in general, there is actually a points cam that slides onto the crankshaft. You might be able to see it right there. And I don't know if I'm going to be able. Oh yeah, here it is. Here it comes. There it is. And that's the points cam. You can see that right here. There is a little bit of a lobe, so to speak, on the cam. That's what actually opens and closes the points. The other thing to notice is, if you see, I don't know if I can show you, but inside the cam lobe itself is a keyway. The keyway obviously engages with the key slot on the crank. This side is flush mounted, or it's flush machined. The other side is kind of tapered. That taper goes in towards the bearing plate. So kind of a neat little thing. Again, kind of cool. It's just a Clinton thing. And these are not interchangeable. There's Type 2 and Type 1. So you got to have the right cam, points cam on your motor in order to run those ignitions. Okay, put that over there. Next up, this arm will come off once we get it out of, once we get this whole unit off. we'll be able to get this out of the way. So I'm going to go ahead and take this off completely. And the reason why I'm taking this off completely is because I want to disassemble this whole thing in order to scuff down and clean up the armature bar, because it is kind of full of rust. There's two screws. There's one right there. There's one right here. We got to be careful with this one because there's a whole bunch of like wires and stuff that are in the way, and we don't want to ruin anything. So let's see if I can get that. I don't believe I can. Looks like we might have to take this. Let's take this screw off. We don't need this here. This is the condenser wires and stuff. We don't want any of this stuff. We don't want to ruin any of these wires. If we ruin the wires, we're going to be in a real world of poop. So let's just get all this stuff out of the way as best we can, so that way I can get in there with the nut driver and get that out. Let's see here. Come on. Now. All right. Well, we're going to have to do maybe some more evasive action here. Got to get the nut. All right. So let's see here. You know what? Let me see if I can get this. See, this is real world, man. This is how it works. Come on. And then, oh, I got it. Oh, there we go. All right. So I got it. It's just a tight fit, and I'm trying to be as careful as possible. I don't want to blow out any of these wires. And that's all right. And there it is. And there is a Type 2 ignition, completely removed from the motor. I'm going to leave this like this for just a second, and then we'll tear into that and clean it all up. I do want to get my flashlight, which is not nearby as one would expect, but it appears that seal is in real good shape. Yeah, I don't see any weeping or anything, so maybe I can get to... There's no weeping of oil or nothing like that, so the seal looks real good. In my prior videos with Clinton Motors, you can't pull this crankshaft seal, or at least the flywheel side of the crankshaft. You can't get the seal out through this way. You have to take the bearing plate off and get the seal out. So it's a good thing that that's nice and dry, because that would be a real pain in the neck. All right, let me move a few things around here. We'll get into that ignition and start cleaning it up. All right, with the ignition on the table here, I'll just kind of explain how I'm going to tear it apart, and then I'm going to tear it apart off camera, because it's just, I can't really do it, unfortunately, with one hand. One thing to remember, this little bar is just hooked into place. If you fail to hook this bar back on before mounting it to the bearing plate, you're going to have to take the whole thing apart again, or take the whole unit off the bearing plate in order to get this on. So make sure that you remember to put that back on, and I'll remind you a little bit later, but just unhook it, get that out of the way. Next, I'm going to undo this nut. That's going to free the condenser from the unit. It's also going to free one of the wires of the coil. The secondary coil wire is right here. So that's unhooked. This will get all unhooked. Next, that screw right there, I'm going to back that screw out, and the whole point system will come off. And basically this whole lower section will be free of everything. It'll just be the casted part. In order to get the coil off, I have to take this tab and gingerly bend it up straight, and then I'll be able to slide the coil off the bar. You can see there's all sorts of dirt and crap in there. We're going to get that all cleaned up, get any rust or anything like that off it. Also, I don't have my flashlight, but we'll check inside there, make sure the coil still has the wire spike in place, and we can just hopefully reuse that. We'll hit it with the little ohm meter just to make sure. But in a nutshell, that's how this is torn apart. A couple things I noticed when I was taking this apart. One, this is the point screw, adjustment screw. Somebody really went to town on it, so probably going to have to go out to the shed and see if I have another one somewhere, because this one's basically junk. If not, we'll figure out a new adjustment screw. The other thing is sometimes these coils can be kind of stubborn coming off the armature bar. Make sure your tang is fully bent up. Just do it really slow. Take your time. You don't want to, you don't want that to snap off, or you're basically done. Notice I don't have this thing tight in the vise at all. It's just the coil is just sitting on top of the vise jaws. None of the wires are pinched. And in order to get this off, I'm just going to take my punch and my hammer, and I mean, I am just going to barely tap it with the hammer, and that should push the armature bar down enough where this spring, okay, because this is kind of a pressure spring, it'll get down to a certain point, and then I'll be able to pull it out by hand. Okay, got the mag bar all stripped down, just needs to be cleaned off. I'll hit this all with a Scotch-Brite pad. Oh, this is this little spring clip that holds the coil in place. It actually kind of goes in like this, and then it has like a little bump right here. That's what kind of friction holds the coil in place, and then you bend the tab over so it can't vibrate up and hit the flywheel. So just got to be careful with these because they're like spring steel, maybe not quite spring steel, but they do snap if you're not careful with them. So that's that. I did go down. I know I said earlier I'd give you the part number, but there it is right there. This is a brand new set of Tecumseh H60 points, 30547A. You can still get these. So brand new set of points. So we'll throw that in there. Clean up the bar with some Scotch-Brite. We'll reuse. I'm going to test the coil. I don't really know how to test a condenser, but it looks like it's in perfect shape. There's no indicators to me that says that this is bad. So we're going to go ahead and reuse this. The coil itself looks like it's in real good shape. Just needs to be cleaned up. Wires look fine. I can't see if that little spiky thing that stabs the ignition wire. Let's just grab the flashlight. Let's take a look down in there. Is it there? Yep. I don't know if I'll be able to get that to focus for you, but there's a little, there it is. You can see it. There's a little spike. That's what stabs into the ignition wire. So we got to get an ignition wire for it, but we'll get this all cleaned up, put back together, and then we'll do the reverse to install it, and then we'll talk about setting the points. I got the basic ignition parts reinstalled. Coil's in place. I did test it with the ohm meter. It does appear to be good. The tab is in place, bent down nicely. Armature's clean. I put the condenser back in, screwed right there with the ground, I guess the ground wire you want to call it, for the coil. That's attached to that. The two armature mounting screws are in place. All three of these screws were made snug, and then just a little bit more. You got to remember, this is old school aluminum, so if you go too much with it, you're going to blow it. You're going to blow the threads out, and that's it. It's all done. You got to get a new bearing plate or find one. Points cam is in place. That's all set. I do have to go out to the shed and see if I can find another points adjustment screw, because this one here is in pretty rough shape. I'll see if I have another one. So let me go dig for that. We'll get the points in place. We will set the points, and then the ignition should be all set. Okay, so the points are in and they're set. Pretty simple process. Just rotate the engine until the points cam opens the points to its furthest open position, if there's a worse way of saying that. Then you take your feeler gauge, which I actually did use the cover, slide it in, loosen up your screw, push the second set of the points over till it just touches, and you get a little bit of tiny drag, and then tighten down your screw, check it. You may have to go back and forth a couple times to get it right, but I got this set right to 20 thousandths, so we're all good there. Next thing I did was connect the coil wire to the bottom of the points, the condenser wire to the bottom of the points, as well as I made a quick kill wire. You can see right here, it kind of comes up, down, behind, and then there's an eyelet all screwed on there. So that's all set to go. The next thing I did is I did put the ignition wire. I should say I went out to the shed and I got this old Clinton ignition. It might have came off a 700 or a 900. I don't know, but I took the screw and the point screw and the ignition wire, pulled those off, trimmed off the end of the ignition wire so it's nice and clean, shoved it up into the coil where that little spike thing I told you about stabs the wire. Just put a little bit of WD-40 on the outside of this dry sheath and slipped it in. Reroute the ignition wire up to the spark plug, I should say. So how do you kind of like do a layman's check of the ignition system if it's going to work. I got one of the probes on one side of the coil wire, which goes to the condenser, and I'm going to take the other probe and I'm just going to touch it. If you can see here, we have full open continuity. That tells me that the coil itself is good. Now, using basically the same kind of hookup here, if I reach up, I'm trying to do this with one hand, I apologize, and I touch the ignition wire, okay? I got it, and I read my meter, it's what? It's about 8 ohms. So that tells me that there's continuity within the coil and that this old ignition wire to the spark plug is all connected together. So in theory, this should work. Now, could it not work? Yes. That would be a determining factor whether or not the condenser is any good. We'll learn that at a later date when we try to start the engine. I'm going to go ahead and put the cover on. There is a little gasket. It's actually right here. This thing goes on first. I should have mentioned, I forgot to mention, there is a little felt. This keeps the cam lobe, or I keep saying cam lobe, but the points lobe clean. Right here, we're going to put that little thing goes on first. Then we take our cover. The cover goes on next. I'm trying to do this with one hand, I'm sorry. And then, well, come on. I might not be able to do this with one hand. Let's see if I can hold that and bring this up and over. Of course, it's going to fight me. Come on. There we go. Ooh, look at this. We might actually do it. And then you bring this over to that position. And then you just push on it. It should clip into place. And there you go. One B1290 ignition system. Clean, set, and ready to go. All right, guys. Thank you very much for watching. Thank you for all your viewership. I know my content is kind of dry. I don't do any real sensational builds, nor do I have like these little shtick kind of things that, you know, I find kind of degrades the small engine community. I'm just not into that. So when you watch my videos, I really, really appreciate it because I don't do any of that kind of stuff. And I hope you find it interesting and helpful. So please like, share, and subscribe. And as always, thank you very much, and you have a great day.